Okay, this very short presentation is about what we've been talking about, trying to tie together parts of the central nervous system with the idea of reflexes. And as we go through this, be thinking about the reflexes we looked at in lab the other day. Now, first of all, what is a reflex? Well, your textbook definition is right here. It's a rapid, predictable, and involuntary response to a stimuli. Okay, now, you know that if somebody throws something at your face, automatically you're going to blink. Okay, especially if it's unexpected. The stimuli, seeing something come at your face. The involuntary response, blink. You can predict it. Can you control it? On that particular one, I'm sure you found out that you could. But a lot of reflexes you can't control. Reflexes will fall into two categories. And these are terms that you're going to be seeing the rest of this year quite a bit. First one is a somatic reflex. The word somatic right here means body. Okay, so this has something to do with your body, in particular the skeletal muscles. Most of the reflexes you looked at the other day in lab were somatic reflexes. For example, the knee jerk, the patellar reflex, the Achilles tendon reflex. Those all involve skeletal muscles. Now, reflexes that are beyond our control, that operate way below our conscious level, are autonomic reflexes. These will be reflexes that are going to involve your smooth muscles and your glands. For example, I've had people say, "I refuse to sweat. I can refuse to sweat." Yeah, right. That's part of your autonomic reflexes. When your body overheats, you're going to sweat. Okay, you cannot control that. Or, hey, maybe you think you can control how fast food passes through your digestive system. Don't think so. You know, those are all involuntary reflexes to a stimuli. In the case of the sweat glands, response to heat. In the case of the digestive system, response to food stretching your digestive tract. Large intestine, small intestine, whatever. All right, now we covered these the other day. I just want to do it now with a picture in front of us that's probably better than what I drew on the board. The 5 components of a reflex. First one, you got to have a sensory receptor of some sort. Okay, in the case of the blink reflex, your sensory receptor is your eye. Or in my picture here, the sensory receptor are little tiny fibers, sense organs inside the quadriceps muscle and also inside the patellar ligament. Now, that sensory receptor has to be stimulated. With the eye, it's stimulated by light source. With the patellar reflex here, the knee jerk reflex, the stimulus is the hammer. After that, that message has to be sent along a sensory neuron. Yesterday I put up on the board the prefix affer, A-F-F-E-R, right up here in the word afferent. The prefix affer always means toward. So an afferent neuron carries impulses toward the central nervous system, or in this case, towards the spinal cord. The third component is an integration center, part of the central nervous system, which is either the brain or the spinal cord. So in my diagram here, the afferent or sensory neuron carries a signal that, hey, this muscle here is being stretched. Carries it towards the spinal cord, and the spinal cord, it communicates with the next neuron. That's the next part, which is a motor neuron. The cell body of the motor neuron is generally going to be in the spinal cord. And that rest of the nerve fiber is going to go out all the way to the muscles, usually the muscles that were being stretched. That is what we call the effector. The effector, remember, can be either a muscle or a gland. And remember, the prefix effer, right in here, E-F-F-E-R, in the word efferent, that always means away from a structure. So this one is going away from the central nervous system. So I've always tried to tell people several different ways to remember these things. Sensory neurons will always be afferent neurons. Okay? Muscle nerves will always be efferent neurons. Okay? Now the other side of this picture that's on here shows a slightly different reflex. This is the withdrawal reflex. Basically, if you touch something sharp, like in my picture here, you poke your finger on a pin, you're going to withdraw it. It goes about the same way. A sensory neuron carries the impulse towards the spinal cord, but in the spinal cord there is a junction, a little nerve that sits between the sensory and the motor. That is called an association neuron. You don't see the association neuron in all reflex arcs. This one here, for example, didn't have it. But here, an association neuron transfers the impulse from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron, which involves you to pull your hand away. Now, I put this slide in because I can't draw very well on the board, so I didn't even try and draw this yesterday. Those sense receptors inside the muscles and the tendons that detect a stretch are called muscle spindles. Now, muscle spindles are basically little tiny capsules looking for stretch in between the muscle fibers. And the Golgi tendon organs do the same thing, only now they're found inside the tendons. Collectively, they are both a type of a receptor called a proprioceptor. They are determining how much stretch is in the muscle or the ligament. By detecting how much stretch there is, they are constantly sending messages to the brain, telling your brain, in particular the cerebellum, how long is the muscle. Because again, how long the muscle is tells telling your brain how straight is your arm or leg. What's the position? Is it above my head? Below my waist? It gives your brain all that information. And when you start to move something, you start to stretch those things or decrease the stretch in them. Basically, when you stretch them, they start sending impulses all the way to the spinal cord and to the brain to coordinate all of your muscle actions. Without these, it would be very difficult. It involve a whole lot of conscious control to try to figure out, hey, I want to scratch my nose. If I want to scratch my nose, I've got to know where my hands are at. And all this information is being communicated through muscle receptors, muscle spindles, all the way to the cerebellum. All right, let's revisit that knee jerk reflex, just as a quick example. Remember, this is a somatic reflex, so it's involving skeletal muscles. Now, what happens, remember, is this. Going back here, the muscle is stretched. This is basically your thigh muscle stretched. Sends an impulse to the spinal cord. Okay, and at the spinal cord, it synapses or communicates with a motor nerve, sends the impulse back, and you contract. Or in this case, you straighten your muscle out. Now, I mentioned yesterday that this reflex would make standing impossible because this is the reflex that is operating all the time you're standing up. It monitors the amount of stretch in your quadriceps muscle all the time, sending messages back to the cerebellum, telling your cerebellum how straight is your leg. If it starts to bend a little bit, you get the message, contract the muscles so you can stay standing up. And we used that example yesterday that if somebody were to come up and tap the back of your legs, you don't fall down because as the quadricep muscle is stretched, the reflex activates and you contract your muscles and you stand back up. This is also responsible for, when you try to lift something, maintaining tension between your flexors and your extensors. In this class, I kind of group muscles into groups, flexors and extensors. Flexors bend the joint, extensors straighten the joint. So the example I gave in class yesterday, if you were going to do a bicep curl, you'd want to contract the bicep muscle to bend your arm, but at the same time you want to relax the tricep muscle that would normally straighten the arm. You can't contract both and have the joint move. One has to contract, the other has to relax. Now, this is the reflex that I mentioned yesterday. There's other reflexes, but I just like this one as an example of a polysynaptic. This a polysynaptic reflex involves more than just two neurons. This example that I used here is called the crossed extensor reflex. We've all done this before. In my picture here, if the man, picture here on the left, steps on a piece of broken glass, obviously that stimulates the pain receptors. And just like the previous slide, you have the withdrawal reflex. You immediately withdraw from that painful stimulus. Now, if you really stopped and thought about it, in order to cut his foot, that man had to step down pretty hard and bear weight on his right foot. Well, if he were to just yank that up, he should fall down. But we don't, because when you do this withdrawal reflex, the reflex also involves contracting the opposite side. So watch the path of the nerves here as I walk you through it. Right here, the pain receptors run up to the spinal cord, where the spinal cord, it synapses with the contractor muscles here to pull your leg up. The muscles are responsible for pulling your leg up, but it also synapses with the other side and causes those muscles to contract in his left leg. So he will stay up on his feet, even when he's originally poured his weight down. So it's an automatic reflex to shift back.